All right, welcome back, everybody, to the show. I have a special guest today I'm excited to talk to. But first, I'll give you some backstory on how I know Stephen. Some years ago, my wife and I were attending a church looking for a guy named Ian McConnell. And I sit in the back, just want to kind of blend in, see what's going on, see what's what. And after service, I remember two people came up and talked to me. And I think each week, two people came up and talked to me. One of them was a guy named Pastor Danny. And then there was another guy who, if I remember correctly, had an Eagles jersey whose name was Stephen. And I didn't remember his name each week, but I do remember at what point, pretty soon after we got there, this guy, Stephen, just disappeared. And I wondered, did he backslide? Did he fall off? Was it drugs? And then I find out later that Stephen's leaving to plant a church. And he's planting a church down in Frankford. In the Frankford section of Philadelphia is a very challenging neighborhood for many reasons that we can discuss. But I was just glad to hear he hadn't backslid, and he actually was going off to do some really good stuff. So, with that said, welcome Stephen Bowne, Pastor Stephen Bowne from Grace City, Frankford, here in Philadelphia. How are you, man?
Good, Eric. Thanks for having me on.
I'm very happy to have you. Thanks for being so hospitable back in the day at Grace City.
Yeah.
Now, at that point, before you went out and planted, how long had you been at Grace City of the Northeast?
It was probably about 7 years that we were at the Northeast Church. I had graduated seminary, and the hope was to connect with the church. Initially coming out of seminary, I thought I would just jump right into urban ministry. But I really wanted to be part of a denomination. And so I got connected with the denomination, and somebody in the denomination said, hey, you got to connect with this guy, like you mentioned, Ian McConnell. He really has a heart to plant churches in the city. So I talked to him and really connected and felt like, wow, this is really where we should be. But the kind of the surprising and difficult part of that was there was no staff position or anything like that was available for me. So I worked bivocationally for, about 7 years at the church, and also worked just a secular kind of office type job, which was good, but also challenging. And but it wound up being a good thing that God really used in our lives.
Now, I want to back up to some of that because you said a lot that I want to. Now, are you from Philadelphia?
Not originally. I'm from the suburbs, about an hour west of the city, in a place called Pottstown, and that's where I grew up. And actually, me and my wife both grew up around the corner from each other. We were high school sweethearts, and we've been together ever since. And we went off to college out near Pittsburgh, and felt a call to ministry, kind of in high school. And after being at college, felt a call to do not just ministry, but urban ministry. So then we went up to Gordon Conwell, which is up in Boston, and they have an urban ministry program that was really neat and really attractive to us. So we went and did that program. And so I got a master's degree through what they call their CUME campus, CUME, Center for Urban Ministerial Education. And so that's where the story picks up, where me thinking I'm just going to jump into a church, and then found out about Ian. And we were glad we thought about Pottstown is kind of right between Reading and Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And so we were thinking we might be in one of those two cities. And actually for a while, there was two different churches that we were kind of bouncing back and forth. Every week we'd kind of go either to Reading or Philadelphia, trying to discern where God would have us to be, and meeting with the pastors there and stuff like that. So it was good.
Let me get clarity on two things, because
Yes.
you say a lot of good stuff. I gotta unpack that. So number one, and you don't have to dwell on these long, but just so you leave Pottstown. Had you spent much time in Philly or Frankfurt, or it was really just, I want to get the training and then I'll figure out where I'm going to go?
Yeah. So we, after graduating college, we got married, and then we were like, we want to purposefully live in more difficult urban neighborhoods that like our parents didn't want us to move into, kind of places. And because we're like, if we're going to do this, we got to make sure that this is really like what we should be doing. So both when we first were married in Pottstown, and then when we moved up to Boston, we moved around up in Boston. We tried to find places that were not the nicest places to live, with the idea of, is this really what we want to do with our lives long term? And so we had not lived in Philadelphia before, but we had been purposely trying to live in places that were more low income, high crime, difficult type neighborhoods, just to kind of see if this is really what we wanted to do. And so then when we moved into Philadelphia, we first got an apartment that was just near where the church was, up in the northeast section of Philadelphia. And then when we were ready to buy a house, we looked to buy a house that was kind of in a neighborhood that could potentially be a place we could plant, but also could potentially be a place that we could sell our house and then go to where God would call us to plant. So at that point, we weren't even really sure, what the plan was going to be, where we were going to go, how this was all going to work out. We just got a house because it was a better financial decision than renting. And then after living there for a couple of years, God really started to work in my heart to be like, you live in Frankford, why don't you plant in Frankford? And that was really kind of we weren't even sure when we first bought the house that that's where we were going to be. We just wanted to live in Philadelphia, and but then God really worked in both of our hearts to be like, no, this is our neighborhood. This is where we want to plant. Let's do it.
So let me draw back to something. So, because I've been in multiple contexts over the last decade where church planting is viewed in very different ways. Missions are viewed in a ton of different ways, right? And so when we think of 1 Timothy 3:1, right, and we have this idea of, if anybody aspires to be an overseer, right, he's aspiring to a noble work. I've known people who would say that's you get called to pastor, you don't get called to plant, or and so was your ambition, if I could use that word early on, was it, I want to go out and be a pastor, or I want to go out and plant, and I want to discern that, and I'm going to go to Gordon Conwell? Would you say it was more of like, I want to pastor, or I want to plant, both? How would you line that out?
I only had one view of what church planting was in my mind,
okay,
for a long time, and that was take a guy and his wife, throw them, parachute them down somewhere, and say, all right, evangelize, disciple, grow it up, and plant your church.
Right.
And I did not want to do that. That did not sound attractive to me at all. That did not sound exciting to me at all. That scares me to death. Like I was like, I am not that. And it wasn't until I was, and that's how kind of my vision of what church planting was all the way through seminary. And it wasn't until I got involved with the denomination we're part of now, Sovereign Grace, where and the church that I was a part of in the Northeast actually had planted one church, and I saw how they did it, where it was a team of people that was sent out all together and kind of dropped in as like a small group, and I was like, oh, I could do that. That I was like even open to the idea of church planting, because I kind of thought, going in through seminary and stuff like that our future would be, find a small struggling church with maybe just a handful of old people with with an endowment that they want to hire some young family to come in and try to like help revitalize their church to the glory days of the 1950s, and that's kind of like what I thought that I would be doing. And I was kind of gearing up for that. And that's kind of the church that I was a part of in Massachusetts. When I was a student, I was a youth pastor in a church that was similar to that, not quite as stark as that, but that was kind of the how it was. And I thought that would be what I would be doing. But then, things just kind of got shifted, and doing something very different than that.
Yeah. Now I want to get into just kind of walking through your timing, your launching, and your growing. Now, firstly, I definitely want you to speak briefly to what led you to want to be a part of a denomination. because, in recent times, I've developed convictions along the lines of I want to be a part of a denomination. But when I learned about church planting, it was like, you should be a part of a network, which will be Acts 29, because that's all you know. And you'll be non-denominational, which is just Baptists in hiding in the closet. And so, number one, if I can ask a two-part, what led you to the conviction to be a part of a denomination? But then as you're walking through, because I hear you get to Grace City and it's 7 years, and I'm wondering, number one, how your wife plays into helping to be a barometer for you, but then also how the church itself at Grace City, you're talking about Ian, I'm assuming Rob is in there. Maybe there's some other people whose names I don't know, but how are they helping you to kind of, crystallize the vision, plan, prepare? So it's a two-part question. Sorry to throw so many words in there.
That's right. I think I'm a little bit different than a lot of guys. I am a big proponent of denominations. I love denominations. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be a part of a denomination. That was a big part of like why I wanted to, when I was coming out of seminary, I did not want to be a part of a independent church. And just part of the, there's just a lot of reasons for that. Accountability is a huge one. Support is another huge one.
Yeah.
And just working together with other people, is, all those things you don't have in the same way when you're just part of a independent church that maybe partners with one or two churches around, but there's no safety net there.
Right.
And it's just, to me, it just seems like a dangerous place to be in, both for the congregation and for the leadership of the congregation as well. Mm-hmm. and kind of either one could kind of go wild, leadership
right.
can go wild and congregations can go wild, and denominations really kind of help with either one of those situations. And so that's, that's also why I would be an advocate for more than just a network, but a denomination, because a network, maybe can't really step in and doesn't really have any authority to do anything when things get ugly. When everything's great, then it's fine. But when things get ugly, having an authority umbrella, safety net, it's an umbrella and a safety net, to be able to come in and kind of help things work out. Now, obviously it comes with some challenges as well. If something happens in the denomination, you kind of, everyone gets egg on their face,
Yeah.
and so you kind of have to take that with the good. But to me, the pros vastly outweigh the cons, especially in our situation where we want to plant in a low income neighborhood where we know that it's going to be a long term. We need support. Having those built in structures where there's these other churches that are part of us that know that, we're on the same page doctrinally, we're on the same page in our understanding and how we do mission and everything like that. So there's no questions about like, I like you, but like, where are you going? And what, right. Everyone's kind of on the same page, and it's like, okay, we want to help this church out because we know them and we love them. And we're kind of forced into fellowship with them because we have these denominational meetings. And I kind of I stay in front of them all the time.
Right. I like that so much. I think, and this isn't a criticism of everybody who's non-denominational, but I think in my experience, sometimes people don't want denominations because they don't want the accountability. Just like people don't even talk about what it means to be confessional, right? Because it's like, no creed but Christ. And it's like, all right, you're constructing a creed right now, because as soon as I start asking you, where are you on certain things, it's there, right? And so I think a lot of times we take a lot of the legwork out by even just thinking on, who do I align with denominationally? Where am I in terms of confessional standards? And so that's really awesome. And so I imagine you come to Grace City, you've got convictions, you know where you want to end up. You want to do urban ministry. Your wife is saying, I'm all in. I don't want to just do urban ministry. I want to go to hard places. I don't want to be in Center City at Broad and Walnut, where I can get all the politicians of the city and all. No criticism of people who do that. But you aspire to hard things. And so and number one, there's another two-part question. What lead you there to stay for 7 years rather than, I'm here, I'm going to try to do an internship for 2 years? What leads to 7 years? But also, how do you change or mature during that time, from vision casting in a broad sense to here's where we're going to go when, putting a team together? How does that come about over that period?
Yeah. Well, it turns out okay, so the whole idea is to be in a neighborhood and stay there long term, right? Mm-hmm. And the best way to do that is to kind of build a lot of support and have a lot of networks and get a lot of both financial and relational support. And we had friends and just people that we met in those 7 years that were church planting in Philadelphia, and they came and went in the time that those 7 years, and now they're no longer in Philadelphia because they were doing kind of the initial model of that I was talking about, where you drop in and just evangelize your neighbors and start discipling and make them your elders, and you got your church. They were trying to do that. And
did you get elders at all?
Yeah. They burnt themselves out, and they felt like they were alone because they were, and they eventually just said, this isn't working, and left. And we were like, well, if we can do it, if we can kind of slowly build up to this and get a lot of support, get the people in our denomination to know us and to love us and to have a heart to want to be like, oh, I know Stephen and I can trust him, and I'm going to then get my church to support him. That went so far. And so now I have, when we planted our church, the same thing with the team. We had a team of people that were from the Northeast, and we were in small groups together for years before they saw me as their pastor. I was like their small group leader. And then when it became time to okay, we're announcing to the church we're going to do this church plant, they were like, I want to come with you. It wasn't and they never were like, oh, I see myself on a church planting team because I'm an evangelism ninja, they were just we love Stephen and Abby and we know them and we kind of see them as our pastor already. And, we live closer to that neighborhood than we do to the Northeast. It just makes sense for us to start going to church there instead of going to so it was building relationships on the team level, and then building relationships for the church, and then building relationship in the denomination. And that just all takes time. So, but it was time well spent because we're doing this long-term church thing, where we want to be here for a long time. And now we're in the grind of church every week and, doing everything. We don't have all that time to build those relationships and interact with those people. But we've already did that work beforehand and that networking beforehand. So now my safety net is there and my support structure is there, that we spent all that time doing, so that now when we're saying, hey, we're going to buy a building and can you give us money and can you send workers? And they're like, yes, we know you. We love you. We've known you for a decade now. We know you're not just a guy that's just going to come in and be like, I'm going to church plant and we're going to start a revival and everything's going to be great. And Philadelphia's going to be turned upside down within 6 months. They know that's not you because you've been walking it slowly for a decade already. And so they're like, okay, we've watched you watch your life. We've seen your kids grow up. We've seen you as a father. We've seen you, in a small group ministry, and we've seen you interact denominationally and denominational meetings and things. And they're like, this is a guy that we can support. And to me, I don't begrudge those other churches from being hesitant because I would feel the same way. So I come at it I try to tell them as far as our finances go and stuff like that, I want to give them as much information as I can. I'm not oh, who are you to tell me? I'm look, I spend money wisely. I'm a good steward, and I want them to I want them to see everything, and I want them to say, oh, okay,
transparency.
I want them to know that I'm open to accountability. I'm open to financial accountability and, being told I'm doing something wrong. And the more I do that, just the more it helps them to be willing to open up to us and to give support and to help us.
There's two things there that I really like that I think are worth wrestling with for all of us. Is number one, like you were saying with this transparency, you want people to know what you're up to, what you're doing. That's one of the challenges, I think, if you're becoming a church planner, because you're developing relationships on denominational levels. You're meeting other people who are at other churches, but you also were part of community, right? Before you went. And that's big because we don't understand. Someone said this to me years ago, whatever cultural DNA is a part of where you are now, you're going to take with you, right? And I remember you leaving and people being sad that you were gone. And what's kind of cool is there were people that you left with that I had just met who were still checking up on me. And I'm like, I don't see them on Sunday and I don't even know that they're with you, right? I think it was maybe 6 months or a year before I even knew that Josue had come from Grace City. This was a guy who requested me on Instagram and I don't know about maybe Facebook. And he would message me and we would talk theology and books and stuff like that. And I don't know, he's checking on me. I'm just thinking this is a cool guy I met who's from my city. But there's this sense that I hadn't experienced to that degree till I came to Grace City, where there are people who have transparent relationships, but they are very connected. It's family. You know, and I've heard people say the church is meant to be a household of households. And I really saw that at work here where it's like, wow, people really care. And so for you, I'm sure that as you're casting vision and preparing the launch, you also have an emotional context that you're a part of where you know people love you. And I remember, I think it was Rob who said, you know, Steve will be here from time to time because he's got office space here, you know, but it's not the same because you were gone, you know. I forgot you had I think a co-pastor, you know, gone and everybody's gone. I think it was Gabriel, right?
Yeah.
And they're over there and we miss them. And it's like, wow, you are being sent and not just leaving. And it does something, and I'll let you speak to this, but I think it does something for us, and especially as a man, to know that I'm being sent with love, encouragement, support. I know that if I had to, God forbid, I can come home. I know that when I go, people are going to support me and come and check on me. Can you speak briefly to that? Like I've always wanted to know that emotionally, right? I've never really known that to that degree, but what difference has that made to your ministry?
Oh, it's huge. I mean, I feel like I'm so blessed. Even though like I kind of step back and like, yeah, we're doing something really hard in a really hard place, but I know it's like, I don't feel alone at all. Which is really cool. Because we have our sending church, we have our denomination, and then I have my extended family as well. That was another really helpful thing. Was like I said, my wife and I both grew up in Pottstown. It's not Philadelphia, but it's an hour away. And so having my parents and having my wife's parents and our siblings who are all believers to be able to connect with as well. And so just having that, like I think the big danger is when a guy's alone, and they're alone, they don't have their biological family, they don't have a church family, and they don't have a denominational family. I think you're in a lot of danger if you have that. And the more of those other things you can get, the better. I mean, the more, the extent of your birth family is kind of like, it is what it is. I don't know if they're going to be supportive or not.
Right. That's it.
But beyond that, you can kind of pick, I'm gonna really sink myself into this local congregation that is going to send me, and I'm going to sink myself into this denomination that's going to send me, and you can build those relationships, and you can have those, kind of checking in with people, and then checking in on you, and getting together, and them kind of taking you under their wing, and it's so life giving. It really is. It's so life giving, and it's worth the time and it's worth the effort. Because it's going to sustain a long-term thing. Like, I mean, like you can't see it as like a 1 or 2 year thing. It has to be like a 10 or 20 year thing. Where you like really like staying in a spot and building something. And
Right.
it just takes time. And that can be frustrating. So to have people to talk to about those frustrations is really helpful.
One of the things that was amazing for me, so we left, my son Gregory was born in June of 2019, and we had agreed in, I think, April to be a part of a church plant in West Philly. And I'm like, we've been coming to Grace City. We're not members at this point, but we've been coming for a year and a half, right?
Yeah.
And while we're not members, it's not my fault, because people always ask me, is it your conviction to not be a member? Nope. I'm going to blame that on someone whose name will not be mentioned. But so we began to transition, I believe, in May, either April or May. And I talked to, Pastor Rob. At this point, Ian has moved on. He's planting in West Philly. And Grace City folks were still in our lives. Right. So we're planting in West Philly out Overbrook. And, when Gregory was born in June, folks from Grace City are bringing us meals. They're doing the meal train. Rob is still touching base. And I can say that this is where my logic didn't meet my emotions. My emotions prepared for judgment and rejection, because here's this guy that's leaving our church and he's going to plant. And I'm not expecting support. And I'm not mad about it. It's just, that's how it goes. I want to go over here and they're treating it as I'm leaving. I'm hearing from Rob all the time. Rob's coming by. Rob's talking to me. Do you need anything? How can we pray for you? And it feels good and weird at the same time. Yeah, because that's something that I'm not used to. Hey, you're not regional, you're not located with us, and yet we're with you. Yeah. And it's like, wow, I could call Rob. I could talk to him. You know what I mean? And that feeling is so important. And I think sometimes, in terms of leadership, and especially as men, we're not accustomed to, we're accustomed to be strong. I got to see this through. And even I think in our vision, and I'll speak for me, of what it is to pastor, it's like, I'm going to walk through this with God, right? Me and Jesus. I have a personal relationship with Jesus. And as long as I got Jesus, don't need nothing else. And I'm going to walk through this. And you don't realize, man, almost right away, something's going to hit you hard. Something's going to test your ability to follow through, right? My pastor, where I came from, used to say, faith, footsteps, and follow through, like in the life of Joshua. You have faith. There's something that God has called you to do. You got to take the footsteps in that direction. But now the follow through is where it gets hard, because now you're going to have the moments where people are going to question stuff, or the first event isn't going to go the way you want, or the school you're trying to partner with doesn't really appreciate what you're doing, or they got a new principal. And it's like, okay, we're going to endure this. And then something else happens. And then it's like, well, what about the equipment? And we purchase sound and that doesn't work. And it's like, wait, I thought I had time to prepare my sermon. I didn't think we need to put the TV together on the stand and, all this other stuff. And you right away that gets dismantled. And I've known some men who were strong and would just push through, right? But they don't realize it's like, you got to leak, man. You're losing power as you go, right? I really think, and I'm trying to say this carefully, you can have a strong prayer life and be close to the Lord and distant from people and not realize you're not as close as you think, because God intends for you to be in relationship. It can't be, I'm the planter or the pastor or whatever kind of ministry leader, whatever, right? And I'm spending a lot of time with God, but I'm not spending time with my people, and I'm not pouring into them, and I'm not hearing what they have to say. And I have all these fears and doubts, and I'm just going to keep it to myself. I'm going to just keep going. And eventually I think something's going to happen. I think Satan's going to exploit it, or you just break down. You know what I mean? And so that was a tangent. But I think it's so important for men to learn that, especially, but men and women, in your marriage, being able to share without dumping. You know how you can, I don't know if you ever experienced that. It's super, super frustration and you just unload it. You know what I mean? And if we don't get this by next week, and here's what's going to happen. And you basically just created a lot of anxiety for your wife because you just dumped. But, but so for you guys at Grace City, you were meeting, you basically have this small group kind of discipleship community. What's the time and how do you go about going from group to finally launching? Is it people around you are saying, yeah, it's time for you to start doing this, or you say, hey, we found a building, or you just start sharing with your group and they're saying, yeah, let's go launch. How do you move from, casting vision to here, we're finally launching? And when does it happen?
So I would say, so at that point in the conversation, I'm on the pastoral team, and there's a group of guys, and we're talking about that. It's kind of, it starts with just kind of like hey, here's the dream.
Right.
And that's like, 7 years ago or whatever, and so everyone kind of knows this is going to happen eventually. But you're kind of, as a pastoral team, you're looking at the church, the sending church. And you love the sending church because you're part of it. Right. And so you don't want to hurt them at all, which is a good thing. And you don't want to hurt the team that you're on because you love those guys. And you also want to plant, and they want to send. So that's kind of an ideal situation, but that's what I had. Thank God. And so it was a decision. It was a team decision. It wasn't a me being like, this is the time because X, Y, and Z. It was we're talking about this in our monthly elders meetings and trying to figure out like, okay, let's, so what we did was we announced it to the church and said, this is a dream that we want to do. And we think Stephen and Abby are the people to do it. And we want to start a new small group. We call them discipleship community group, a new small group that's going to be in Stephen and Abby's house in the Frankford neighborhood. And if you think you might be interested in being a part of a church plant, then the first step is to be a part of this small group. And so for, I think it was a couple of years, we met on Friday nights, and we just had a small group. It was, like small group ministry, you eat together, you have a Bible study, you pray for each other, you watch the kids run in and distract everything, it's just, small group. And we met, twice a month on Fridays for a couple of years. And we as a group kind of were just doing and then on Sunday mornings, we'd be up at the Northeast going to church. And so that was another really good, again, slow, but really healthy thing. Because I'm not trying to organize a Sunday service at all. I'm just a small group leader, not just small group, but that's compared to doing the whole thing. I'm only a small group leader, not all those other things. And so we were able to just be small group leaders, and I'm still working a secular job and still have a heart to be involved in my neighborhood and caring for these people, but it's not a church, it's just
right.
And so after doing that for a couple of years, you kind of develop friendships, and you develop capital and leadership capital. If you just meet somebody, it's really hard to lead them. But if they know you and they know that you love them and you know that you are for them and they've walked through hard things with you and you walk through hard things with them, and you've had times when you had to call them out and they've called you out, and when you had all that stuff happening already, and then you start the plant. Well, then you have all that capital and all that. And then when you're frustrated on a Sunday morning, or you're feeling discouraged, or you maybe are a little sharp, or a little, say something a little, they probably shouldn't have said it in that way. The person's like, it's cool. We're friends. We've known each other for 10 years now. Like, I'm not just going to leave. Whereas if that's somebody that just walked in the door and I want to be part of church plant. And this first time they met you, they're like, this guy's a jerk.
Especially if it's their first church plant.
Exactly. Right. So that really helps us a lot. And so that was kind of the, again, I'm tangenting like you said. Okay. This is kind of that slow build, really that slow on ramp really helped. And then once we announced, then we announced to the whole church, it was like, okay, this small group has been meeting together, and this is on Easter Sunday, we want to start they wanted to be their own thing. And so I remember it was April 1st, because it was April Fool's Day, which was funny. That was going to be our kind of big launch date, but then we had a soft launch before that, where we had just our, that small group of people instead of going to church on Sunday, we went to church in Frankford, and that was the beginning of the church. And we kind of got used to doing that it was about a month. And then we kind of built up to our launching in the neighborhood and having a, public, here we are, we're a church in the neighborhood kind of thing.
And so that's Easter 2018?
Yes.
And so at that point, are you balancing your time between, I got my Friday nights with my group, and are you doing stuff in Frankfurt? Or are you just walking through the neighborhood, praying, talking to people? Are you getting to know churches down there? How's that prep going?
So I was able to, this is kind of our timeline. I worked my secular job until the end of the year, the end of 2017. And I was able to stop working end of 2017 and start working full time as a church planter pastor in January. So then I had January, February, March to kind of do all the administrative stuff that goes along with a church plant, the incorporation and the tax exemption and all that kind of nonsense that just takes forever to do. And I was able to that was my full time job to do all that stuff. Plus kind of like think about sermon prep and, sermon plans for coming up.
What series you're going to preach? What's going to be your first
series
launch sermon?
Yeah. So I was able to. So those couple months were really great gifts. And then also just walking around the neighborhood, like you're saying, praying, just doing like evangelism, handing out tracts, talking to people that are hanging outside, kind of thing. Praying a lot, connecting with people and organizations in the neighborhood, things like that. That was being done during that time. And then still also meeting with the, doing your small group ministry as well.
So you're getting down there.
Worked.
Gotcha. I got a bit of a tangent too. Was you speak to something? So for me, because we were at this point, we had been a part of other teams that were going to plant, but this was 2019 for me. It was the first time going into leading at a plant. Yeah. And I remember feeling anxiety over, okay, we got to go out and push the launch. We've got to, get some tracks out, all this, get this done that Friday, then that Saturday. And I'm just like, and my co-pastor says, we don't need to do all that. Let's spend some time with our team. Let's go to the normal places. I actually felt really good about that. But then I heard a video from Tim Keller about how when he was a pastor in West Virginia, he spent a lot of his time with the people and then got to sermon prep. I had wanted to just dive in and study. And then if I'm spending time discipling people, study with them and study. And right away, it went from study to spend time with people and try to get in sermon prep and get as much done as you can during the week. And then, Saturday night, cry, pray, and work. I'm just being honest here. And lately I'm reflecting on it, and I'm studying 1 Thessalonians right now. And what I notice a lot of what Paul is saying is, as here's what our conduct was before you. Like Paul worked in such a way that he developed credibility. Mm-hmm. And I think that was important to me. And I kind of switched from, I got to get this study in to I got to follow up with this phone call and spend time with this person and all. And I do believe the necessity of the sermon and the preparation of the preacher. I completely believe in that. Mm-hmm. But I realized I went from kind of, I got to study and preach to I got to spend time with people and then make time later to preach, which who knows what hours it's going to be and how hard it's going to be. It was very, because I was still working full time, over 40 hours a week and preparing to launch and had a baby, right? So I've got 3 kids and this infant that was just born on June 3rd, right? We had the soft launch earlier and then we're preparing to launch by the end of the summer. What's your take on that kind of idea where spend time with people and get your preaching right, definitely preach expository sermons, but what's your thoughts on that and how do you mitigate that balance, from then till now?
So one of the things that's like so I really believe in preaching and the importance of preaching and the importance of preaching for the church and for outreach and for discipleship. And so I try to prioritize that. Somebody said to me once, you got to do the things that you can only do in the church. And so I think one of the things that is dangerous, especially in our situation, is there's such need, and people are so lonely, and people have so many issues, that there's such a strong temptation to I could spend time with people all the time. I hear, you've been down to where we meet in a storefront, and like people are just walking past all the time.
Yeah.
And if I have a curtain that I close so people can't see that I'm in here, because if I don't do that, then the people will just be here all the time. And all I'll do is be with people and talk to people. And all they have is time. We're talking about people that don't have families, don't have a spouse, don't have kids, don't have jobs, don't have a house. And so like all the things that don't have really hobbies because they don't have money. And so all they have is time, and you're a listening ear, and you care, and
you got coffee there too.
Yeah. And there's coffee. Yeah. Yeah. So, I could easily spend and so I need to kind of I say all that because for me, the temptation more is the opposite of what you're saying. To just spend all my time just with those people, but they're hurting, but they need somebody. But I can listen, I can do that, and other people won't. And I'm here, and isn't that what I'm here for? And so I need to discipline myself and be like, "Yo, you need to preach biblical sermons, and they need to be from the Bible, and they need to be true, and they need to be gospel centered, and they need to point people to Jesus." Because that's what people really need. And so I try to for me, I try to read on Mondays, like my commentaries and stuff. Okay. And then the other days, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are like a lot with people and doing other things and trying to fit things in when I can. And then Friday, I just block out completely. And I don't meet with people. I don't talk to people. I don't, maybe if somebody calls, I might pick up the phone. But Friday's like sermon prep day, and that's an all day thing. So I have my reading on Monday, and then and I'm kind of thinking about it throughout the week, here and there as I can. But then I'm like, Friday's sermon day, and I've tried to train my people that's how it is. And so I'll have people now like, oh yeah, I know you're working on your sermon today, where I'm kind of teaching them I need to do this day. And then what I've been able to do with that then is then take Saturday as a day that's off.
Wow.
And I do that because, I have 5 kids. They're all school aged, except for the one is still preschool. And so Saturday is the day that they're home and we can do stuff as a family. And so I've tried really, really hard to make it so that Saturday I actually have the whole day off. Now it doesn't always happen that way. Right. Especially now we're in the middle of this big building renovation thing, which takes a whole other chunk of time that is not planned. So Saturdays kind of sometimes get taken over a little bit, but the goal, the plan, the ideal is for each week. It's like Saturday is off. And then I wake up early Sunday morning, do my final, going through the notes one last time and figuring everything out and putting all the pieces together. So I'm still, Sunday morning is kind of like cram, get the delivery and this illustration here and that one there. That's Sunday morning. And then I preach, Sunday morning. So
someday I want to be where you are, because when you're bivocational, Saturday is a big chunk that you can use. I don't believe in Saturday night specials. I would say up until 2013, 2014, I had done a couple of them where it's like, this day has been crazy. I did some commentary work and some reading and some exegetical stuff, but I'm putting this thing together Saturday evening, and I hated it so much. But I think one of the things that helps, whether you're planting or just preaching, is like doing a series. So like we were doing the book of Acts, and this also goes to men, period, whether you preach or not, should have study habits, of reading and studying the Bible and prayer time with God, because I believe when you have that kind of devotional life, if you would call it that, it's easier, I think, to have a habit of preparing to preach or lead groups or anything like that. And because we were in Acts, I could just swim in that. And I'm one of those people, maybe I'm just a weird preacher. When I'm learning something or digging through God's word, I love to talk to people about it. Like I've got to talk to my kid, wife, so if there's a chance to have a conversation with someone, I know I'm going to try to apply what I was just reading in Acts chapter 5, right?
Yeah.
And if there's small groups, structure them around what the sermon was about, and those kind of things. Because I think over time we want to develop people who do the ministry work with us and not just for us, where we're doing all the meeting and all the talking and all. And but so getting to Frankfurt though, I just realized some of our listeners are not from Philly or are outside Philly. Can you kind of give a sketch of what the Frankfurt section of Philly is like overall, and even what ministry is like in Frankfurt?
Yeah. So Frankfurt's kind of the transitional neighborhood between the Northeast, which is like a blue collar section of the city. There's, mostly white in the Northeast, and then North Philly, which is mostly non-white and more of a low income. The hood, yeah, is the
ghetto.
Yeah. and Frankfurt is like the middle neighborhood between those two regions of the city. And so it creates a really interesting dynamic, a really interesting racial makeup of our neighborhood, which is one of the things that's really helpful for me, honestly, to be in this neighborhood as a white man. It's not like I'm the only white guy in the neighborhood, and that helps. Just practically, it's in our neighborhood, and this is not normal in Philadelphia, right? Usually you have your black neighborhoods, you have your white neighborhoods, you have your Latino neighborhoods, you have your Asian neighborhoods, and that's just how it is. Frankfurt, just because of where it is, it's pretty even mixed between white, black, and Hispanic in our neighborhood. So I could be any one of those and and not be like out of feel like a fish out of water in this neighborhood. So that really helps, and that's really that's kind of one of my favorite things about Frankfurt as well. Just to see the intermix of people, and people kind of are just used to relating to other people because that's their neighborhood is like that. They're neighbors, and the people, it's kind of intermixed.
It's a melting pot in some ways.
Yeah. But it's also, one of the things that Frankfurt used to be a really, really nice section of Philadelphia, like back in the day.
Right.
And it was kind of the suburbs to Center City. And so the doctors and the lawyers and the businessmen and all the people that worked in Center City, they built their big houses in the nice area of Frankfurt and then hop on the L train to go down into Center City.
Right.
Well, what happened over the years is those people that lived in those big houses, they sold their houses and moved further out. And those big houses then got converted into apartments, rooming houses, and recovery houses. And so one of the big things about Frankfurt is that there's just so many recovery houses and so many boarding houses. It's just like so many on a block. It's not like one or two here or there. Like, it's just because that's just the way that the neighborhood works. And so you have all these big old properties that are split up into 10 or 15 different rooms that people live in. And then that kind of changes the dynamic. So you go from, a wealthy family that's a doctor that lives in that house to then you have 15 single guys that are in recovery living in the house. And so that just changes the nature of the block, right? I mean, and then there's just going to be a different kind of feel. And then you just play that scenario out over and over and over and over again. And now you have our situation that we have in Frankfurt, where it's kind of a high crime area. There's a lot of litter, a lot of graffiti. The storefronts are all not all, but a lot of them are boarded up, or they're either a daycare or a place that sells cigarettes and beer. And that's how they make their money. And so it's just kind of like what used to be kind of like a thriving, really cool place, and you can kind of still see the architecture from that, is now kind of run down, and people are afraid to be here, and they don't like to walk through it. And, it's, there's shootings and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the where we're at now.
Yeah, I hear it, because even as you were describing, you said on a given day, you can be sitting there, if the curtain's not closed, you have people who don't have jobs, who don't have anywhere to go, who have lots of problems and time to talk. And all those things are at your front door. This is not the normal church plant. Any urban church plant, you have a lot of things you're running into. But it's all getting thrust upon you. And I remember, so I got out of high school, became an EMT, went off to the military. And I come home, I'm working for an ambulance company in the fall of '99, I believe. And I hadn't been through Kensington and Frankford and all that before. I heard of it, but I was from West Philly, right, all the way out 60th Street. And I remember one night, because I would work 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and we're in Frankfurt. And we stopped somewhere on Frankfurt Avenue at like a pizza place or Crown Fried or something. Crown Fries everywhere, and it's really good. And there was someone who came out who I had identified to my partner, like, that's a crackhead. And I'm just going to say, I said crackhead. And he's like, hey, man, we need help out in the alley. My friend's hurt. Come help. So here I am, young. I'm ready to go. Let's go help. And my partner says, dude, don't go anywhere, man. They're trying to raid our truck. They want drugs. And I'm like, no way. Like, he's saying they need help. And he's like, don't you do it. He's like, don't ever. Well, he said it in different ways, but he's like, don't you ever get out the truck for something like that. And that was my introduction to Frankfurt, right? That if you're coming up from North Philly, well, what used to be North Philly that they rephrase as Northern Liberties, and you come up through Kensington and Frankfurt and all, you're going to see open air drug market. You're going to see homelessness. You're going to see open air prostitution just right there in front of you at night, right? And so for us, we have an ambulance. People are looking for opioids, and this is over 20 years ago. Yeah. That's what we're encountering. And so Frankfurt is so different. It's like, you go to South Philly and you see people parking in the middle of the street. You say, how did they get away with that? You go to Frankfurt and you see prostitutes that are just blatantly prostitutes. And you're like, no, you're playing with me, dude. And it's like, no, those are prostitutes. And that guy over there, he's really high. He's about to fall over. And that's the thing you've seen grow over time, right? And one of the interesting things about your ministry is it's been said to me more than once that if Frankfurt were to change tomorrow for the better, and they said, we're moving all the homeless out, prostitutes, the phrase that I've heard is, Stephen Abbey would leave tomorrow. They would go wherever. I kid you not. It's been said. Stephen Abbey will go where those people.
We'd be so disappointed.
Right. You dislodge those people. This is important because here's why I really want to get that. Because for some of the people who will listen, who can come from a potential partner church, the golden rule still applies. I still believe this. People feel like he who has the gold makes the rules. And if they're going to fund and support a church plant, a lot of times they want to speak into how you do ministry. And the expectation is not your church is going to be made out of people who are maybe not literate, who have mental health issues, who have drug issues, who are relapsing, who need community because they just kick the habit, but they're surrounded by people who have the habit, people who've just gotten out of prison or are constantly going back and forth, recidivism, single moms, all those kind of things are the everyday for you. And so the idea that you could plant and then by 2021, you would have been this self-sufficient ministry that had elders and deacons, that's not a realistic thing. And many times those who have the finances will say, here's what we want to see. And why don't you do that? Here's what our church did last year. And it's like, yeah, but your church, you've got like 600 people. You've got a choir. You know what I mean? And the expectation is that you would do that. And you cannot. And to some degree, you don't want to because where you are is different. Success for you looks very different. You know what I mean? And I want to get you to speak into this. But like, I remember, like, I want to lead some guys to read some books with me, learn some stuff from Ed Welsh and all. And then you got a guy who can't read well. And it's like, well, just to get him to be able to study the Bible, he's got to learn to read. Mm-hmm. And now that's a whole different challenge you don't expect. If you're coming from an environment where people worked and had, budgets and all that kind of stuff. And so I guess number one, I want to get to long term. How do you see that? You're at Frankfurt. What is success looking like over the next few years? And the other one I want to get you to answer. Well, let me get you to answer that first, because the other one I want a long answer from you on. What's success look like at Grace City Frankfurt over the next year or two?
Survival.
Good answer. Not losing all your hair.
It's our mission statements are kind of, people have them and you kind of use them or you don't use them or whatever. But ours is to make and mature disciples of Jesus Christ in Frankfurt. And to me, success is, are we doing that? And right. And for 5 years from now, are we still doing that in 5 years? Or have we drifted? Have we become a social service agency instead of a church? Or have we become a country club filled with Christians that we just like to be together and we don't let anybody else in, right?
Right.
Those are possibilities, right? I mean, like we could be tempted to do those things, either way, And so to me, are we keeping the main thing? Are we preaching the gospel? Are we making and maturing disciples of Jesus? And are we seeing that happen? To me, that would be success. Are we doing that? So there's some, there's some other things I'd like to see. I'd like to have another guy that's all of that, like is being able to be full time and be so that we're able to do more and interact with more people. To me, that would be kind of just kind of more of a practical answer. Like to have a second guy would be fantastic. That wants to be here and is here full time, and having a church and having a network that's able to support that. Right. That would be really cool too. That's more of a practical answer.
No, but that's a good one, because I think you're a good example of, we've got to get to a place where we can collaborate, right? Where the aim is Jesus' glory and not our own credit, right? Especially post-pandemic, where we are in places like Philly, Trenton, Camden, we can't just do the lone wolf, and we can't just do here's us and our sending church and we'll do it. We need resources, whether it's people, whether it's financial, whether it's just the support, right? Where we can network without having to form a network, right? Every relationship with different churches doesn't have to be, well, let's be Acts 30, right? We need to get to that place. And so that's why I don't chagrin the urban church or the rural church. I say, let's all work together, right? And we have to start typifying that and developing those relationships, where I've said to a couple different pastors, listen, you got people who could probably go help Stephen, right? And I'm going to make it very uncomfortable for people, because you do have resources. And so rather than maybe having your picnic on Saturday, which is cool, maybe you can move it and go help down in Philly, right? And do some missional work. But there's some people picking up a hammer is not missional, but that's a different story though.